Everyone, and thank you very much for that wonderful introduction. Thank you for having me here. Thank you for your leadership and your friendship. And as I mentioned outside, I'm very thankful and honored to be here. Honored to have been able to provide resources, particularly when we think about protection. But it breaks my heart that in 2024. We have to use resources to protect the community instead of using those resources to enrich people. Unfortunately, it's where we are. It's a time that hopefully will change. It's a time that we will hopefully together be able to stamp out hate, racism, anti-Semitism. Unfortunately, we know that there are places where it appears to be on the rise. And those of us who have purchase to speak from, and those of us who don't necessarily have as high a perch, rather it's elected office, in the synagogue, in the schoolhouse, at your favorite restaurant or your favorite organization. We all have a responsibility to talk about peace, to talk about tolerance, to talk about recognition that we aren't all exactly the same. And what a boring world we'd have if we all were exactly the same. But I can say without fear of contradiction that whoever we deem to be our higher being, none of us were ever made to be any better than anyone else. At a minimum, equal. At a minimum, equal. That means we should have the ability to live, to love, to worship, however we deem to be appropriate, with one never taking precedent or being better than any other. And that's the way I was raised right here in this community, growing up on the West Bank of New Orleans, with most of my professional education being right here, and my professional life being right here. I've been blessed to study and see the rest of the world, but there's no place like home. No place like home, and no place like being in a position to be able to push back against hate, to push back against intolerance, and to be fortunate to be a member of Congress with the ability to have a voice that speaks to peace, tolerance, unity, and the recognition that none of us are perfect, but none of us are better than anyone else. And no one has the right to challenge our faith, to challenge our beliefs, to challenge who we are, what we are. Government doesn't have it. Individuals don't have it. Radicals don't have it. No one has it. And so tonight I'm happy to be here to give kind of a thumbnail of where we are from a funding standpoint, from a relationship standpoint, from a congressional standpoint, and from a human standpoint. Because as you know, there's a lot of unrest going on. There's a lot of things that's happening in our community. And unfortunately, much of it is driven by misinformation and hate.
Bless you.
The notion that some would profit from dissension is unfortunately quite a reality. The notion that some would pit one against the other for whatever reason, be it political gain, personal gain, or just pure hate, is real. And as an African American man, we've dealt with it all our lives. You've dealt with it all your lives. Many others have dealt with it all their lives, but it appears to now be at a all-time high, making an unfortunate resurgence. It's not a wound that was just created, but in many ways it's a scab that's been pulled off. And some have found a freedom and a comfort to once again espouse the kind of hate that isn't good for your community, my community, or quite frankly, good for any communities. So when we talk about the American-Israeli relationship is based upon countries' shared values and it's critical bringing of peace and stability to the region, I'm committed as I've said publicly and privately and in my actions, not just my words, but my deeds, to continue strengthening that relationship, to provide resources, to make clear that Israel has the unequivocal right to exist and to defend itself. The massacre on October 7th was brutal, and Israel had every right to bring those responsible to justice and to free hostages, including some of which were actually Americans, to make sure that we fight to bring them home. With friends, it's sometimes important to point out areas where we may have blind spots. And I support the Biden administration's effort to push for a bilateral ceasefire. But I made it very clear to those who challenged us and those who criticized me personally, those who picketed my office, those who wrote horrible things and painted horrible things on our properties, who wanted us to push for a unilateral ceasefire. Well, a unilateral ceasefire is equivalent to asking you to tie your hands behind your back while the other person continues to beat you about the head. That makes no sense. And those of you in New Orleans probably have heard, like I grew up, my parents always said, you better not ever hit anybody first. Underscore being first. But if they hit you, you got every right to defend yourself. It's no different. But also, it would be ridiculous to say, Israel, tie your hands behind your back and let's allow Hamas and other terrorists to continue to beat you about the head. That doesn't make sense. I've said that publicly. I've been criticized by some, and even have a gentleman running against me. And his number one reason is because, quote unquote, he's too soft on Israel. And I'll take that. If that's what you think, I'll take that. But the picture goes much deeper. People have to understand, as I do as a member of Congress, that you don't have to always agree. We don't have to always agree. People don't have to always agree, but there's some fundamental things that you can't disagree with. And that is the relationship that the U.S. has with Israel, and the significance and the richness of that relationship should always be preserved. Should always be preserved. And for those who don't understand that, is because they just don't understand international law, they don't understand international politics, they don't understand foreign policy, and I dare say that they don't understand just life. Because friends are supposed to be there when their friends need them. Having friends that only show up when things are good are not really friends. And the relationship between the U.S. and Israel is a friendship that we've enjoyed forever, and we will continue to join forever, and you can count on this member of Congress who will always herald and stand up for that relationship. In Congress, we've taken several steps to support Israel, including providing $26 billion in supplemental military and humanitarian support. We've also passed several other measures to demonstrate the U.S.'s support for Israel. This is in addition to the funds appropriated in 21, $3.3 billion military aid, $500 billion missile defense, 2022, $3.3 billion military aid, $1.5 million in military defense, $3.3 billion in military defense in 2023, $500 million in missile defense, 2024, $3.3 billion in military aid, and $500 million in missile defense. However, the use of some issues that I know I've talked to some of my friends. I see my dear friend Alan over there who serves as my conscience oftentimes, to along with other friends who call and often say thank you, but every now and then ask why. And I appreciate that. My dear friend Arnie, who isn't here today, as you know, is my very, very, very dear close friend. Give a big shout out to he and Sue for being great friends of mine, and also those who pick up the phone and share their concerns, the issues. And most times after we have a chance to talk, they're made clear. So I'll bring that up just to say that you may at home look at some votes and say, well, wait, why didn't that congressman vote for that? Unfortunately, in this system of politics where R's and D's often find ourselves in opposite corners, and so much to the point that sometimes the R or the D becomes more prominent than the A, American. And that's unfortunate, but it happens on either side. And some of these measures have what we refer to as poison pills embedded in them. So you may look at a measure that has the perfect title, and it speaks to something that you would say, if you're pro-Israel, why in the world are you opposed to this bill? Until unfortunately you read the deeper parts, the content of the bill that is embedded with poison pills that do other things. And it's not just in Israel-US relations. It might be in any particular bill. It's misleading when you look at a congressional instrument and you see its title, because the title doesn't always give you the full picture of the intent of the legislation. And in legislative circles, we refer to this as unintended consequences. Unfortunately, some of those consequences are in fact intended to embarrass you for voting against something that sounds like you should have voted for, or intended to trick you into voting for something that really isn't in the best interest of the people that you represent. Neither of which is really cool, but it requires a conversation with our friends who sometimes only read the title and say, why in the heck did you not vote for this? And so as you see those, I got a whole list of them, but as you see that, always feel free to pick up the phone. I started my career in local government as a very young man working for then Mayor Sidney Bartholomew before being elected to the city council, being elected to the House, the Senate, and now Congress. So I'm accused as a member of Congress of sometimes flying too low. When I talk to my other members of Congress, I say, man, you work way too hard. Why are you dealing with all those local things? Because that's kind of where I started. So I'm used to coming to, and I actually enjoy doing town hall meetings. We do a lot of them. We do what we call LEO2 curbside, which is our version of town hall meetings, where we take the resources of federal government, whether it's Veterans Affairs, Social Security, or what have you, and we boil it down to a town hall sized meeting. And we bring those issues directly to people so we can fix or at least address their issues on the ground. Everybody doesn't do it. I'm just crazy enough to actually like it and to still have that part of my local government training that brings me to that. So I say that to say, when we talk about these things, I'm always willing to meet with or to come back and have conversations, rather in smaller settings, larger settings, or even one-on-one, to talk about things that you see in real time happening in Washington. The ball moves really fast. There's a lot of moving parts, and that adage that says it takes an act of Congress to get something done is underscored. It takes an act of Congress to do anything in Congress. It's not that easy. But it begins with, in my estimation, it begins with listening to the people that you represent. It begins with having these low-flying events where you get to put names and faces and touch together, and not just some guy or a lady that you see on the 6 o'clock news, or you get a glimpse in as they walk across the House floor, but to fly low enough to hear from the people you represent and to talk about it, to hear your feelings, to field your questions, and to share with you things that you may not see or feel because of the vantage point for which you are versus where we are on the street. I've got a whole series, and I won't go through all this. My staff is very thorough, very, very thorough, more thorough than you probably want me to be tonight. But it just goes through a lot of the measures. I've talked to you about the funding bills. I've talked to you about, unfortunately, the unrest that's going on in our country, in our world. I think we all agree that there's been way too many innocent lives that have been lost, regardless of which side of the equation. My job is not to pick winners or losers. My job is to pick right and wrong. My job is to make sure that we fund meritorious operations and that we promote peace, that we promote everyone having the right to exist. but you've got to do it within a framework that doesn't infringe upon, hurt, or in this case, kill innocent people. The notion that some would suggest that with people marching saying Jews will not replace us is somehow entertaining for some, or for some who the notion that Hamas should be treated as a recognized and equal government. They're not. They're not. They're terrorist organizations that use children as shields, that are cowards, that build their operations beneath hospitals and orphanages. And the propaganda, unfortunately, that is presented doesn't always tell the picture. Listen, my heart bleeds for the innocent people, be it Gazans or Palestinians or those of Israel descent that die innocently. That's not what our world should be. And for those who want to push us in the corner and say, you're either for Israel or you're against Israel. You're either for Gazans or Palestinians. Well, we're not going to do that. And you can't make me do it. The best you can do is vote for somebody else. And I'm okay with that. Because I've been in this business far too long to have the tail wag the dog. I'm elected for one purpose, that's to represent the people and to do what's best for the people and to operate with integrity and a consciousness of doing what's right. And peace has always been the chosen item on the menu for me. And it will continue to be the chosen item on any menu, is to push for peace, respect, and decency of all people. We're America. And that's what we should always do. You know, we've got a United States Constitution that the framers put together that has amazing staying power. It's been identified that there are changes. There were things that weren't right. And as we find them, we've amended them to make it better. And even with those flaws, America remains the best country in the entire world. And we should act as if we are. We should continue to govern in a vein of unity, of decency, and civility. Violence has no place in public discourse. Violence has no place in religious discourse. Violence has no place anywhere other than the battlefields of legitimate war. Everywhere else we should be able to negotiate and talk and agree in a way that is not disrespectful, hateful, and certainly not violent. So with that, I'm happy to be here with you, happy to have given you perhaps more than you asked for in an overview, or maybe not enough. But whatever the case is, you know what they say about politicians, we've never met a mic we didn't like. So I'm gonna try not to be that guy. But again, to not leave the opportunity to thank you all for the opportunity to allow me to be here at JCC and to be with you. And let's together continue to fight against hate. Let's together continue to work for a world where differences are viewed as pluses, not minuses, where our diversity is our strength, not a weakness, where our assets or the fact that maybe we talk a little different, look a little different, act a little different, and take the time to learn about each other instead of talk about each other. So with that, thank you all for the opportunity.